We're going to color things on the iPad today. Welcome to Illo Talk. I am Cory Kerr. And what I'm doing here is on the left, you'll see what I'm working on. On the right, you will see what I've finished. You can see this and the rest of the stuff that I make at corykerr.com. I use a program called Autodesk Sketchbook or Sketchbook Pro. And I like it a lot. A lot of people use Procreate or others, but I like this one. What you're seeing me do here is inks. And there's a couple things that you can do with inks that are kind of cool. On the iPad, it's pressure sensitive, just like a Wacom Cintiq. And so the harder you press, the larger your line is. So I kind of swoop my hand up at the end. I kind of whip it up. And that gives you kind of these tapering lines that I really like. And then the other thing that I like to do, you'll notice in the corners where you have one line joining another line, I like to thicken that line and kind of round out those corners to like suggest a joint. The cool thing that I'm doing right here is I just kind of bob my hand up and down, kind of dabbing it, kind of shaking it pretty quickly as I draw this line. And if you do that vertically, like towards the screen, then it increases and decreases the pressure really drastically. You can get kind of this dotted wobbly line. But I'm not just doing this randomly. What I'm trying to do with this situation is I'm trying to put more dark things on the shadow side of things. So you'll see that as things curve away from the camera, the viewer, I'm putting more lines closer together to kind of suggest that. Then what I'm going to do next, you'll see me do this in a minute, is I'm going to do flats. And so I just take like a marquee tool, a selection tool, and I just lasso the things. I've really only got 2 or 3 different colors here: lips, eyes, skin, and octopus. And so each one of those I add in as a different layer because I want to come in and be able to control things later. And with Autodesk Sketchbook, you don't have masks. So I use a single layer per color because of that. And then just going in and kind of getting a nice silhouette on the outside edge with this kind of dotted stuff. And I added another layer where I'm painting in this gray. It looks a little brownish because it's next to the orange, but it's actually a pure gray. And I like using mid-tone grays for things because they accept color really well. And so later when I start blending layers together with transparency and blending modes, it allows those things to accept. So you can see on the right that where I'm coloring gray on the left here, on the right side you can see that some of those are red or blue or orange or yellow. And that's because I'm blending those things in. And so right here you just see me just kind of paint in some gray. I really only use one brush because of the style that I do. I like to have very clear lines. I don't use textured brushes or anything like that. So then what I do is I will make a copy of all the colored layers, combine them together, do a hue saturation adjustment, and make it totally white, and then paint black in. And I change the blending mode to that to multiply, and then lower the opacity. And the cool thing about this is as I do this, you're seeing that when I paint over orange, it gets a darker orange. When I paint over purple, it gets a darker purple. When I paint over yellow, it's a darker yellow. I don't have to sit here and mix colors over and over again because I'm doing what's called an adjustment layer. So this layer is on top of all of the other colored layers, the flats. And then I just do a multiply layer adjustment, and then I do drop the opacity. On the lighter side of things, I make a copy of everything, combine it into a single shape, do a hue saturation adjustment, and crank that all the way to black, and then I turn it to screen. And when I turn it to screen, all the black disappears and only white shows up. And so that's where I can come in and do highlights, and I do the same thing, drop the opacity, change the blending mode to screen instead of multiply. And so my highlights are screen, my shadows are multiply, and then you can see me just kind of come in. And what I'm doing here is I'm trying to add texture. So I'm imagining that this octopus kind of has a bumpy, rough, kind of slimy surface. So you have a lot of specular highlights, and you'd have those cast a lot of shadow. And so I'm going in and I'm kind of doing these dots, and I'll kind of dial it down a little bit later when I drop the opacity. But all of this allows me to prep for the next stage. But before I get to the kind of the last stage, the secret sauce of my style, of what I like to do, I'll take you through kind of the layers. So we'll just finish up some of the highlights here. And then here's what I'm actually seeing. So this is the program itself. And you'll see I've got a bunch of different layers. I'm just turn a bunch of them off here so you can kind of see the different things. You can see the eyes and the lips and the skin and the octopus layer and all that jazz, right? So we'll get it. So I started with just blue line sketch. So you can see I experimented with a couple different mouths, and that blue line is pretty loose. I don't like follow it precisely. And then I will come in and I'll start kind of layering things. So you'll see me turn on, that's my shadow layer, that's my highlight layer, that's another highlight layer, there's my inks, and then I have this special layer that I'll talk about in a minute. I'm just gonna add a couple, or turn a few of these back on here so you can kind of see what's going on. So that's everything, that's the end product. But if I, you can see that because these are each a separate layer, that I can come in and do a hue saturation adjustment, and I can change the hue like I'm doing now, or the saturation, or the contrast, or whatever. I can come in and I can kind of dial these colors in. I don't have to select anything. So if I'm like, you know what, I actually want this octopus to be green, or I want it to be a little bit more blue, or a little bit less saturated, or whatever, I can come in and I can just slide these around. And because I have each color on its own layer, I can do that pretty easily. You can do it with selections and stuff as well, it's fine. The last thing that you'll see is I'm kind of toggling this on and off. That top layer, it's like super ugly looking, and it's got all of the different kind of radial gradients. And what I'll do here is I'll take my ink layer and I will do a selection on the outside of the ink layer and then invert that selection. So that my selection is around it, and then I'll create a new layer and do radial gradients. So in Sketchbook Pro, gradients work a little bit differently, but you can see I can just pull this line and it gives me a gradient annotator. I'm going to do two things. Take one of those and change it to an eraser, which means that it's 100% transparent, okay? Or 0% opaque, however you want to look at that. And then I take the middle one and I change that to a color, and then I take this entire layer and I change the blending mode of it. So once I change the blending mode, then I can come in and you can make it more blue, or you can make it more red, or whatever, and it mixes with all the colors underneath it. So that's kind of how I like to do this, and then I'll just take the opacity and kind of mix it down a little bit more. You can see that you can add in red, you can add in blue. A good rule that I heard that I like to follow sometimes is if your shadows are cool, then your highlights are warm. If your shadows are warm, then your highlights are cool, and you kind of contrast the warmth of those as well as the value of them, and that kind of helps. So hopefully that was helpful, and you guys enjoyed that. I will be doing a series of things later on, so if you haven't subscribe, because I'm going to jump into some animation. It'll be fun. Check out my stuff at corykerr.com, and you can check out my podcast at corykerr.com/blog, or just any podcast app. Just search my name, CoryKerr, and you will see two podcasts come up, Illo Talk and 48 Hour Art Check. We'll catch you guys later. I'm out.